Nothing could have prepared this teenager from Florida for the Vietnamese jungle. Here's what it was really like to be drafted into a war, and it's probably not what you think. Most soldiers who served in Vietnam were young, some as young as 18, others barely out of high school. The government sent them a letter telling them they had to serve, and if your name got picked, well, you were going to war. You had no choice. One month you were home eating dinner with your family, sleeping in your own bed, worrying about normal teenage things like homework or weekend plans. The next, you were on a plane headed somewhere most Americans couldn't find on a map. Military training had prepared them physically, push-ups, drills, long runs with full backpacks, but no amount of training could fully prepare a person for the reality of what was waiting for them in Vietnam. Many soldiers have said the moment the plane landed in Vietnam, everything they thought they knew about the world flipped upside down. The heat hit first, then the smell, then the sound of a place that felt nothing like anywhere they had ever been, the jungle. Picture this. It was dense, it was wet, and suffocating in a way that's difficult to describe unless you've stood inside of it. Visibility could drop to just a few feet in any direction. The terrain swallowed entire units whole, and getting separated from your group even briefly could be a death sentence. Soldiers moved slowly and carefully, never knowing what was waiting behind the next tree or beneath the next step. Animals, insects, and the constant noise of the jungle created a relentless background sound that never stopped. And after a while, silence became more frightening than the noise. Viet Cong. The Viet Cong were undercover Vietnamese fighters who opposed the American military. They didn't wear uniforms, they didn't fight in open fields, they hid in plain sight, appearing as normal civilians during the day and becoming fighters by night. That made them one of the most dangerous and psychologically exhausting enemies American soldiers had ever faced. Picture this. Every trail you walk could have a hidden grenade waiting to take your life. Every friendly-looking farmer could actually be a Viet Cong in disguise. That was the reality of every single step. US soldiers never fully knew who to trust, and that uncertainty created a constant, grinding level of stress that was almost impossible to someone who's never experienced it themselves. The waiting, the not knowing, that wore men down faster than almost anything else. Some veterans have said it was harder to deal with than actual combat. At least in open combat, you knew where the threat was coming from. The heat. Picture this. Vietnam's climate was relentless and unforgiving. Temperatures constantly pushed past 100 degrees, and the humidity made the air feel thick enough to chew. Soldiers carried heavy gear everywhere they went. Rifles, ammunition, medical supplies, and radio equipment for days at a time without meaningful rest. Heat exhaustion dropped soldiers every day. Staying hydrated was a constant battle, and the water sources available in the field weren't always clean or safe to drink. Purification tablets helped, but didn't fix everything. There were stretches where the heat felt like its own separate enemy, taking soldiers down before they ever made it to the war zone. Monsoon season. For several months each year, the rain came and simply did not stop. The trails turned into thick, deep mud that sucked the boots right off your feet. Nothing ever dried. Not socks, not uniforms, not sleeping gear. Trench foot and skin infections spread quickly, and soldiers had to inspect their own feet daily. Food supplies spoiled. Equipment rusted faster than it could be maintained. Every night, soldiers dug into the mud with their bare hands just to have somewhere to sleep. Cold, wet, and barely big enough to fit a body. The rain meant nothing to the enemy. If anything, it made things worse. American soldiers struggled through the downpour, and the attacks, well, they never stopped. There was no off switch, no safe moment to fully exhale. Operation Agent Orange. It gets worse. The US military had a simple idea: poison the jungle from the sky to destroy crops that the Vietnamese depended on. US soldiers on the ground had absolutely no idea what they were being exposed to. They walked through the spray, sometimes drank contaminated water, and thought nothing of it because no one warned them. Decades later, the truth became impossible to ignore. Many veterans developed serious and often fatal illnesses, multiple forms of cancer, severe nerve damage, respiratory disease, all directly linked to that chemical exposure. In some cases, the health consequences passed to their children and grandchildren. Many veterans spent years fighting the government for acknowledgement and compensation, but for a lot of them, that fight became the Second War. Casualties. Losing a fellow soldier changed a person in ways that are hard to put into words. Units became extraordinarily tight knit out of sheer necessity, and when your brother was killed or wounded, the grief hit fast and it hit hard. Medics worked under active fire to save lives with limited supplies and no time to process what they were seeing. Many soldiers made an unspoken promise to protect the men beside them, and some paid the ultimate price for keeping it. The weight of those losses didn't stay in Vietnam, it came home with them, and many men spent years replaying specific moments, wondering whether different decisions could have changed the outcome. PTSD. The term post-traumatic stress disorder wasn't part of the common vocabulary during the Vietnam era. It was sometimes called shell shock, sometimes combat fatigue, and more often than not, it wasn't called anything at all. It was just quietly ignored, but the condition was widespread and severe. Nightmares, sudden vivid flashbacks, uncontrollable anxiety, and explosive anger followed thousands of soldiers home without warning. Many didn't understand what was happening to them. Others understood, but they were too ashamed to reach out for help. The mental health programs available to veterans at the time was minimal at best. Many men suffered alone for decades before receiving any kind of formal diagnosis or meaningful support. An entire generation came home broken in ways nobody wanted to talk about. Coming home. Returning to the United States was not the relief that so many soldiers had spent months dreaming about. The war was deeply unpopular in the United States, and the reception waiting for veterans was often cold, sometimes openly hostile. There were no large parades, no crowds lining the streets. In some cities, soldiers were advised to change out of their uniforms before entering the airport just to avoid confrontation. Many men quietly slipped back into civilian life, trying to reconnect with families and friends who loved them but couldn't truly understand what they had been through. Nothing could have prepared these men for how different home life would feel. The jungle had truly changed them. Some veterans thrived eventually, but many struggled for years. And here's the hardest part. The country that sent them to war was the same country that turned its back on them when they came home. It took decades before the country even began to say thank you. And for too many veterans, those words never came at all.